Welcome in, everybody. We're going to give folks 30 more seconds to join in, and then we're going to get started. Okay, we are about 30 seconds past the top of the hour, so welcome everyone. We have a great webinar for you today and a great group of presenters. Just a few housekeeping notes to start off with. We are recording today's webinar. We'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you with a link to the recording and slides. You can also download the slides on the platform today by clicking on the PDF in the related content window. If there is time, we will have a question and answer period at the end of the webinar using the Q&A function located in your toolbar. So please feel free to type in your questions at any time and we will get to them at the end. Also, at the end of the webinar, please fill out the survey that will automatically pop up on your screen. We'd love to know what you thought of the webinar and how we can continue to improve the OmniGrowth series. So again, thank you for joining us. We have a great webinar for you. And to start, I'd like to send it over to Ann Zabowski for the introduction. Ann, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. And thanks everybody for joining today. The third and final of 2024 OmniGrowth webinars series from the ones that we've been doing to help you diagnose and drive OmniGrowth. And today we've titled our webinar, The Next Chapter of Commerce, as we really feel like we're hitting an inflection and we're starting to see an acceleration of some behaviors across the board to omnichannel. And we'll talk today about some of the headwinds and opportunities to be able to take advantage and leverage these capabilities in a holistic framework to truly accelerate your brand's growth and sales and share in today's marketplace. As I get started, let me do a quick introduction. So I'm Ann Zabowski. I'm VP of e-commerce here at Circana. I'm joined today by my colleague, Oscar Kasubski, that he'll introduce himself as well. But Oscar and I have been in this space for over 16 years together, understanding with great background in bricks and mortar, also understanding the e-commerce space and helping to navigate the territory here between omnichannel across the board. Oscar, do you want to do a little bit of an introduction on your background?
Oh, sounds good. So hi, everyone. I'm Oscar Kasubski. I'm the Chief Growth Officer of First Mover. We are e-commerce and next commerce educational platform. I've been with e-commerce for the last 18 years. Started in DTC and work at Kimberly-Clark, Mondelez, and Kellogg, driving that e-commerce. And now it's all about driving the next generation of e-commerce capability through some of the educational events, training, consulting, and also, temporary workforce.
Awesome. Thank you, Oscar. And so we've partnered together with First Mover and Circana to put together some of our data and solutions with the thought leadership to help drive change in the marketplace and enable leaders to help drive change. So as we take a look at our agenda today, what we've got is we'll start out now that we're in November and Q4 is quickly descending upon us as we are about to close 2024 and take a look at the year-to-date growth trends, including which channels are winning and why. Then we'll dive into the omni consumer and the active trends and behavior shifts that we're seeing in the marketplace and what the role of omnichannel capability is for loyalty to retailers and brands. Then we'll actually leverage our digital shelf solution to help diagnose some of the growth drivers here and how to connect leading metrics and KPIs with sales causals to actually accelerate your growth and identify and prioritize opportunities to help drive next chapter of growth. And as we wrap up, we'll talk about some of the organizational capabilities as well as toolkits and change management required to help drive the next chapter of commerce and success for you and your brands. So let's dive in. As we take a look at the growth trends so far year to date in 2024, we'd like to start out with just a lay of the land in terms of e-commerce. And when we start talking about e-commerce, most people don't look further than retail penetration. In other words, what is the share of e-commerce of total omni-channel sales? As we take a look across the board from general merchandise through the traditional CPG categories across the board, we're at a stage where especially gen merchandise, over 50% of many categories are actually kind of 50-50 between bricks and mortar stores and online. And we continue to see, even for food and beverage that have lagged behind, that we're already at double digits, and 10% of total sales in food and beverage are also done online today across the board. And as you take a look at the arrows about what that trend has been, it continues to go up by 1, 2, or 3 percentage points each year. But oftentimes we tend to think about, well, it's only 10%, so let's just focus on the other 90. Reason not to focus on just the 10% is by taking a look, and Oscar and I have been big proponents, especially as we think about brands that are looking to help drive incremental growth and where should I be investing for growth, is taking a look at what e-commerce is as a share of omni-channel growth. And when we take a look in this chart across the landscape of the retail marketplace from what e-commerce represents from a share of growth perspective, the numbers are even more stark. We've got almost 10 of the departments across the board here where more than 100% of the growth is coming from e-commerce. And that would mean that bricks and mortar is declining, and any growth is coming from e-commerce that's growing more than the decline in bricks and mortar. There's a number of categories here that range from 60 to 90%. And even when you take a look at food and a couple of the other categories down here, food is even up to 36% of growth coming from e-commerce. So across the board, we're starting to see that acceleration, and very important as we take a look at investing for growth and thinking about resource allocation.
So I think, the biggest challenge that we have is when we're actually talking to our clients is to help them to kind of understand, where to put the investment, in 2025. And as basically Anne was talking about on the previous slide, if you look at it, we actually see a lot of the growth coming actually at the moment from e-commerce. But when you actually look at the budget allocation, there is still a big gap that needs to be addressed. And I think, one of the challenges is that when we actually talk to any of the VP of sales, and they're basically saying is like, Oscar, I don't really believe in this 85% of, number when it comes into, growth coming from e-commerce, across the entire industry. It just doesn't seem real. I still want to win the store. And I think, the biggest challenge that we basically are telling everybody is that you have to really look much more broadly, not just across, your category, but just look at the entire industry and really kind of trying to understand where the growth is coming from. What are some of the, some of the things that are happening within both the store as well as e-commerce. And the truth of the matter is, if you actually look at the brick and mortar growth, we've been actually struggling since middle of 2023, almost for last 18 months to actually find any positive pockets of the growth. So the growth has been very anemic when it comes into brick and mortar. The little kind of a spike that you're seeing in 2024 is actually when some of the hurricanes were hitting. We actually saw in a 1 week a massive kind of back to kind of the store when people were just basically stocking up, and for obvious reasons it didn't make sense. To actually use e-commerce for that. But I think, from that perspective, even after the hurricane hit it, we actually started to see things normalizing again, which, the normal for brick and mortar, unfortunately, is either flat or slightly behind. But I think, what's important to understand is that, e-commerce has been 16% of the total dollar sales growth year to date. But if you actually look at from a broader perspective, the number is like 85% of the growth is actually what's coming out of e-commerce. And that equates to about 5.3x when it comes into like its growth versus fair share, in terms of that. So you have to kind of see this from a much broader perspective. And do show your sales leadership just all the categories, what's really going on, and have this really hard discussion about some of their resource allocation.
Think about the shopper and what are the shopping choices that shoppers are making heading into the next year. We've seen a really active shift in some of these compensating behaviors, especially for the reacting to the sustained inflationary environment that we've been in. And at Circana, we track changes to shopper behavior through our monthly shopper survey across the board. And so we're able to see some of these changes over time. And if you were actually with us in our September survey, we showed the same slide, but the numbers have changed a ton. So I'm going to highlight for you a lot of the things that have changed and really accelerated across the board, both overall and then particularly with millennials that are in a household formation stage and driving a lot of the growth in the marketplace as sort of a leading indicator of where all shoppers are headed. And so even in Q3, since the summer months across the board, we're starting to see more than ever a number of actions that help limit spending choices overall, and especially some of the purchasing activities relying into some of the like buying on sales or coupons. So these shopping choices and limiting behaviors are highlighted in the purple coloring here, where we're very focused on value. When we last looked at these behaviors, especially cutting back on non-essentials and looking for sales and deals more often, there was almost a 10-point jump, especially in terms of cutting back on non-essentials amongst millennials. That was just under half before, and we're looking at 61% overall now. The next biggest jumps in behavior also come from looking for coupons more often and switching to lower cost brands alternatives in a number of categories, and especially at a number of retailers that have really strong private label programs. Increasingly, we're starting to see more of a shift down to private label and store brands, in addition to other brands that are part of that merchandise ladder, especially if shoppers don't feel that they're getting categories and value out of that. And so as we take a look, those behaviors really have started to accelerate even over the past couple of months. So as we're planning for 2025, want to be really sensitive to how we're communicating value and where we are, both in terms of price as well as features and what we're delivering to shoppers across the board. The other thing that we're starting to see is also, as we take a look, highlighted in the pink, is making and shifting the outlets in which we shop across the board. And so what we've also seen a big changes in outlets and shifting to what folks would consider value retailers in order to save money, buying in bulk way more often, especially amongst millennials, a huge shift there, and switching to lower cost retailers, so both value and lower cost retailers. And we'll see that playing out. Oscar, if you take us through how we're seeing that play out in terms of which channels are winning and why.
Yeah, so this is, I'm sure, because of some of the comments that we already made, you're going to have a question is like, okay, but which channel is winning? Do we actually see any cannibalization of sales, people moving from traditional brick and mortar into e-commerce? So we'll actually answer all of those questions because, we constantly think about this, and, that just keeps us awake at night. But really, from a broader perspective, I always like to look at the breakdown between grocery, mass and club, small format, and pure play. Remember, grocery still is predominantly the biggest driver of sales, 37%, followed by mass, 34%, then small format. And when we actually compare 2023 and 2024 percentage of contribution to the dollar growth, we see that grocery is slightly accelerating its kind of contribution, mass and club also, but where we actually see the biggest drop is the small format. So think about anything convenience, drug, etc. It's definitely a lot of the growth is actually shifting from the small format into mass, club, and grocery, and we're gonna go down into just a broader perspective. But then when you actually look at pure play e-commerce, which, it's predominantly Amazon, Chewy's of the world, we'd also see acceleration of the growth. But we'll break down everything later on. So in terms of the shift, so you can actually see exactly where those shoppers are moving from to. So we'll provide that data.
Yeah, I think as we see folks going to more reliably low-priced and value alternatives, Club becomes an interesting one, especially as people pay in advance a membership fee in order to get more value. And so as we see a lot of growth in not just mass, but also Club market share, we can diagnose from our receipt panel data where that share is coming from across the board, and broken down here between food and beverage categories as well as non-food CPG. And so as we take a look across, if we start with some of the grocery categories, most of that is coming from mass, grocery, and even some convenience are suffering the heaviest losses to Club shoppers that are bringing their purchase and a big share of requirements into the Club outlet, with a lot of the fresh categories being some of the largest share gainers for Club. And it's not just bulk purchases, it's actually meat, deli, and dairy are 3 of the top 5 categories in Club that are stealing most of the market share and shifting that into the Club outlet amongst new members. If we take a look at some of the non-food side, that is also coming from mass, but also drug and dollar lost the most market share among Club households, with actually paper, nutrition, weight loss, and laundry and household cleaning being some of the top 5 categories that shift into the Club outlet and away from other categories where they've been playing. So that's what we're seeing from a market share growth perspective. And if we take a look at who are some of those new members, as now 70% of US households are Club members across the board and paying for the privilege of getting value and shopping in those outlets an annual fee, we can see that across the board, we're starting to see more lower income households going in. So that's one of the biggest growths overall is in terms of lower income. We're also seeing millennial and Gen Z, unmarried and smaller household size. So this perception that you need to have a huge family, higher income, which is where growth really got started, and a lot of that shopper, it is becoming more of a place for everybody to go shopping. Some of those other segments are wanting to buy in to the Club value proposition in order to get broader value on their total share of requirements and selection and curation. So that's a big piece of where it's coming from. And outside of Club overall, we're starting to see a broader based mindset shift towards value.
Yeah, so we're always looking at what are some of the consumer trends that are happening within just broader industry, because we want to kind of be able to explain the numbers, and especially when it comes into brick and mortar. But the trends that are like catching our attention, and we mentioned some of them in our previous webinars, is definitely there is a big trend on TikToks, on Instagram when it comes into underconsumption. The challenge where we actually basically what we are seeing is that people are realizing is that we as brands, we want them to spend more money, but that spending more money comes in as a very stressful grind type of a lifestyle when you're just trying to work to be able to buy more, and people are basically looking at to rebalancing it, because if you have a grind both at work and then in your life, it just the entire life just becomes not sustainable from that perspective. So I think this, as well as we had this whole movement of shrinkflation, which we as brand probably it was a little bit of a mistake for us. Just because of we were looking at making sure that we actually can hit specific financial target, but consumers looking at that, they were not really fooled by this, right? So we now have a little bit of a different trend. This is an example just from one of the pizza places, Domino's, and it's basically saying is like, hey, you can actually have a moreflation at the moment versus shrinkflation, right? So we actually see this trend quite a bit, is where we actually resetting a little bit what has been done during the early period of inflation. And I think, from that perspective, it's a little bit of a value reset, when it comes into that. And we know since the beginning of the year, Target, for example, they announced, $5,000 items, 5,000 items that were basically discounted. They actually are now basically announcing 2,000 more. But I think, finally at the end of the year, we're going to have about 10,000, which is 10% of their entire assortment on a discount. Walmart is doing the same thing, about 7,200. So I think, and even, Party City was actually lowering, 2,000, items that over the summer. So we're definitely going to see that kind of changing that attitude. And think about it the new value reset is not really about creating a low quality item for a very low price. It's more to kind of creating an item that is specific for that, creating the best value for that specific price point. So I think, at the moment, because we need to kind of reset a little bit the trust of consumers into our brands, we need to be focusing to creating specific items for the specific price, right? So an example of that would be during the period of premiumization, it was okay to create a $1,000 cell phone, $2,000 folding cell phone, and basically continuously to add marketing on the top to squeeze extra 20-30% more of money. Now we're actually going a little bit in the reverse, because people are basically calling our bluff and basically telling us, it's like, hey, give me actually a $500 cell phone, but make it the best you can make it, because that's all I need, right? So I think from that perspective, we're actually going to see that reset of the value and making sure that people actually pay the right amount of money for the right product, right? Versus that period of premiumization. And I think what's going to have to happen is we'll have to regain consumer trust to be able to go back to the same kind of a notion. Is like, okay, let's figure out, can we upsell them to a higher product category? But I think this time around, we'll have to be very specific in terms of why do they need this versus, hey, just do it because it's, an Apple or, a Google, whatever the brand is.
The other thing I'd build on, Oscar, too, is there's a lot of work to be done at the item level, as well as for retailers at the basket level, because quite frankly, a lot of consumers make their choices about which outlets they go to based on the basket perception and how much did I expect to spend at the register versus what I actually walked out with across the board. And so I think that tension too between what brands are doing in terms of price cutting and expectations in order to help drive growth and find that balance of top line and bottom line profitability to help drive increased growth. And I think there's a lot of assortment work to be done, especially together in partnership with retailers and thinking about what's the right merch ladder across the board in the category, and are they giving shoppers the right choices across value within the store and the selection. I think that will play a much bigger role heading into 2025. So as we think about the active choices folks are making and how we can reset value amidst this trends of underconsumption core and more inflation, but even amidst all of these headwinds, I want to reinforce that e-commerce is the number one driver of growth, not just overall and maybe in somebody else's categories, but not mine. As we take a look, the share of growth has accelerated. It's almost doubled this year at 85% of what it was in 2023 at 40% of the total growth. And as we take a look at the CPG departments across the landscape, you can see in perspective the continued acceleration. Keep in mind, 2022 is already off, some extremely high growth during COVID across the board, and almost every category is continuing to see growth across the board. And if you're looking for overall omni-channel growth, in many cases for these departments, e-commerce is the only way to grow.
So I think, from a position of just kind of a recap is, number one is e-commerce is basically accelerating its position as one of the growth driver. And even for some of the category that think about it, grocery, think about alcohol. Because where alcohol is at the moment is e-commerce is like one of the only positive channels when it's actually you able to grow. The other thing is you also got to think about it is that there is a gap between the economic indicators and how consumer feels. Anne always laughs at me because I call it a vibeflation. It feels a little bit like, from economic indicators, we don't have inflation at the moment, but people just feel like, and then they're comparing it to what prices were basically in 2020. Right. So from that perspective, is just they are not accepting that new reset of the new higher prices. And that's why we really got to focus on, winning back consumer trust to really drive the to drive the growth. Then the last one is the Gen Z and millennials really feeling that pressure. And I think this is kind of where that reset of the value, kind of understanding under consumption and kind of really changing the strategies because, they are dealing with much higher problems like, for example, the cost of, housing. That's the mindset we have to kind of create is to make sure is like that this is no longer going after aspirational products, but it's more trying to actually meet, balance the budget, satisfy some of those basic needs. And how do we market? How do we create products for them? Might have to change, in the next coming years, just, because of that.
So let's switch gears a little bit. And now that we've diagnosed what's happening from a sales and share perspective across the marketplace and the channels are winning, let's do a deep dive into the omni consumer and talk about some of those behavior shifts to find value and understand a little bit more detail where it's coming from and the motivations behind it. And especially thinking about this notion of how much is incremental versus share shifting as we think about that e-commerce growth, and is it all coming from bricks and mortar, and how we manage it and how we plan to activate our strategies for growth. So if we start with the omni consumer, 84% of buyers have been omnichannel shoppers, and that number has been pretty constant really over the past couple of years since COVID over across the board. But then as we break that down across the different departments, you can see that higher penetrated in some of the gen merch, health and beauty categories across the board, closer to 50%, in pet and even beverages at 50%, whereas some of the other food categories a little bit lower, but still over 30% of shoppers are buying food, beverage, frozen, refrigerated products online. So while there's not necessarily new omni shoppers in many of these categories, it is increasing 1% to 2% a year across the board. But what is shifting dramatically is how much of these categories are being purchased online. So as we take a look at incrementality is the big question. That was actually the first question that came into the chat, I think on slide 2 of the presentation as we started. And I said, hold on, that number is coming. Across the board, if we take a look at where it is coming from, we're able to diagnose and leverage our data to look at incrementality of how much is coming from new buyers versus consumption. And when new buyers are relatively flat and consumption is up, that's pretty much because we're looking at dollar growth and inflation more so than units is coming, which leaves us with some of the net shifting behavior from other channels. And so as we take a look at the overall e-commerce growth that was close to 15% over the last 52 weeks, ended in September, 41% of that growth is coming from channel shifting. That too has accelerated from 19% a year ago. So we're seeing, again, the overall e-commerce shift in terms of dollars grow, as well as the incrementality accelerating in terms of where that growth is coming from.
One of the things that, I personally kind of pay attention to is what's the modality of it, right? And we actually were looking at both the delivery and the pickup, because for me, a lot of the VP of sales of brick and mortar, they always say it's like, hey, Oscar, I can actually get them to the store, for online pickup, and maybe they will walk in because they forgot an item and I can re-engage them. But what we are seeing is that the e-commerce is actually growing mostly on delivery, and actually pickup is actually dragging e-commerce down at the moment. And you can see this both across all shoppers. It's -6%, as well as millennials, -9%. So you have to understand is like the convenience factor is changing, where a lot of the retailers that invested maybe 10 years ago only in those pickup location, they might be struggling at the moment, because consumers are basically looking at kind of a total convenience, right, when they can actually have it all deliver to their homes. So that's a massive factor when it comes into that. So I think we have to kind of keep reminding ourselves, and this is like one of those slides that I definitely recommend to you put it in your deck for your sales leadership, a brick and mortar sales leadership, that would help them to understand just the broader dynamics. Then the other thing is, of course, we want to talk about specifically where all of those sales are shifting from, which venue to which. So we kind of put together some of those examples so you can actually easier understand them. So the one of them is, what I was actually talking about, the convenience and drag brick and mortar. We definitely see a massive shift to both the club brick and mortar, as well as the food and bev and e-commerce. And some of it is driven by convenience, because convenience is no longer just the physical location, but convenience means basically to save time and money, and not to mention things like bulk purchasing, right, in terms of it. And then what's really super important is the selection. So I think the small format stores will actually struggle at the moment, where they have maybe only 2,000 SKUs on display, versus where people are actually used to browsing and selecting products from hundreds of SKUs, because they want to kind of hone in on what they really are looking for. So we definitely see convenience and drag and brick and mortar struggling when it comes into that, and probably this trend will continue in 2025.
And as we take a look at the mass channel, it's interesting. That's one of the many channels that's gaining share from the drug channel across the board, especially as shoppers shift away from many of those high-low pricing models into low-cost and value-based retailers. That said, they're also losing share, as we talked about earlier, to club. But the other place they're losing is to some other grocery experiences and pure play e-commerce as they search for value alternatives. So there's a lot of that is an offset and losing share to Walmart and Target losing to their own e-commerce. So from a true loyalty perspective, those omni-channel capabilities that Walmart and Target have built, they're focused on increasing their e-commerce penetration, is a way that they've maintained and sort of kept in their omni-channel ecosystem a lot of those sales, rather than losing some of that to Amazon. So there's still some of that is going to Amazon and pure play e-commerce specialty players across the board, but the strong omni-channel value proposition is offsetting some of their losses and switching, as e-commerce and omni-channel options give folks a way to get both lower cost and convenience in multiple different ways. And I think too, here online offers another way to get broader based selection, which is where the combination of what's sold in store, as well as access to broader marketplace selection online, to augment and help the retailer keep a broader share of requirements for their retailer needs, plays an important role in loyalty to those omni-channel retailers.
Then if we actually looking from a perspective of e-commerce, we definitely see that both e-commerce like type of Walmart or Amazon, Chewy, they're actually getting a lot of those sales both from the brick and mortars that they specifically have only pickup kind of capabilities versus holistic capabilities. So we definitely see a lot of those shifts between those channels, and that's actually what's fueling majority of the growth when it comes into e-commerce and basically because of those time savings. And I know that sometimes a lot of the VPs of sales are also saying is like, but hey, there's a lot of fees, delivery fees, etc. But Amazon has shown that, for example, paying $130 per for Prime, per year. It's doable, especially if they actually add additional value of maybe TV and then different shows. But then, for example, even Walmart just cut the price of their Walmart Plus subscription from like $98 to $49. So they're constantly running a lot of those specials to be able to do it. But we also see even Club has figured this out, because Club is actually in e-commerce is not actually promising delivery within, let's say 2 days. They are basically saying it's like, hey, it's going to get delivered to you maybe in 5 to 7 days, but you're going to get a great value. So I think, that whole notion that, those delivery fees are major stopper for people, this is no longer holding the true when we actually look at the data.
I think the other interesting thing with Club, as we switch gears to Oscar, is also that for some of the items that they do sell that overlap the Club store, they actually charge more for it. And oftentimes, it's even as much as a 20% premium to what the price is for that same item in store. And so across the board, there's many times that people are buying into loyalty and having those delivery fees taken off the table, but also moving into other things like subscription that help balance out where retailers and shoppers win, where retailers knowing that the order is coming up can actually save a ton of money on that by shipping in 3 to 5 days versus the expectations of immediacy, but still meeting those needs of consumption. So we actually leveraged, as we think about those omni-channel capabilities and the role of subscription, leveraged our shopper survey capabilities and one of our templated surveys around subscription to take a look at the vitamins category, which is one that essentially has been seeing, when we take a look at incrementality here in this category, we saw 41% across the board of growth coming in the total marketplace. But as we deep dive into vitamins here, saw 26% growth overall, almost 24 of that percent coming from growth. But as we're taking a look here, we see like 3% is still coming from bricks and mortar as we take a look at the incrementality. And a lot of that is coming from mass and grocery bricks and mortar outlets that it continues to shift into e-commerce. When we take a look at the role of subscription capabilities in the supplements categories across the board for folks that are buying online in the category, you've got 90% of folks that are just buying online when they needed or wanted it. A lot of those folks are omni-channel and also buying it in store, but we've got almost a quarter of folks that have bought online that already have their vitamins and supplements on subscription. Of those folks that buy on subscription, we asked about which retailers they are subscribing to, and 82% of those have subscribe and save on Amazon. This is an interesting place where Amazon's actually built out their subscribe and save capabilities almost 20 years ago. Oscar and I were reminiscing, comparing to this, as I was one of the first Amazon moms back in 2008 with my first child. And it's interesting that it's taken almost 20 years for many of these other retailers to build out those subscription capabilities, because it's a lot easier said than done in the complexities across the board. But Amazon continues to win with finding the specific products that I want, having it put on subscription, and enrolling that for a discount. And when you take a look at which retailers are winning, that subscription service capability is one of the biggest reasons that they continue to win alongside the selection that they have. If we start on the left-hand side of this chart and take a look at the percent of converted buyers amongst vitamin shoppers, Amazon and Walmart rank just behind the specialty players, right? So obviously some of the VitaCost, Vitamin Shop, and iHerb specialty players, you're pretty much only going there for the categories. So you'd expect those conversion rates to be high, but both Amazon and Walmart continue to really dominate in this category with over 50% conversion, followed quickly behind by Costco before you get to some of the other outlets. When you flip then to the other side and take a look at the share of wallet amongst vitamin shoppers, this is where you can see just how dominant Amazon is, with almost 60% share of wallet amongst vitamin shoppers, and both the specialty players and Walmart a little bit further behind. But it shows the dominance of Amazon in this category and that capability of subscription, really setting the stage across the board to help drive that loyalty to Amazon. And when we asked consumers a little bit more about their subscriptions and loyalty to both the retailer for subscription as well as the brand, what's interesting is we had folks say that 80% of the subscriptions perfectly fit their needs, and another 19% was close to, that it was close to. There's some things that they wanted to change. 82% are likely to continue their subscription. Almost half of them have subscribed for over a year. So we're developing long-time habits and loyalty here by investing in some of the discounts and loyalty through subscriptions. And then as we think about the opportunity for growth and consumption, almost 30% of folks are using vitamins more often because it's always on hand at home. And that loyalty to brands because they're using one or primarily one brand, and they're no longer switching as they've kind of set it and forget it. So a lot of benefits across the board to subscriptions to prevent some of the switching and behaviors. However, from a retailer perspective, especially in this headwinds as relates to value becomes super important. There were 65% of folks when we asked about potential to switch that said that they would consider switching to another retailer for a lower price. So that balance of the convenience alongside price plays a key role. But if you think about all of the acquisition costs that you're not paying for by getting somebody onto subscription, investing that into price helps drive loyalty as well as increased consumption because it's always on hand. So that mindset of the new value and convenience can't be understated. The omni-channel consumer is actively migrating towards value. TikTok's even made it cool again with underconsumption trends as we've covered off, and we're really seeing that accelerate across channels away from some of the high-low value propositions, especially if we take a look at convenience and drug that are losing to Glub. They're not the only ones, and we continue to see that shift across the board to the omni-channel propositions and e-commerce. The second notion we want to reinforce is that e-commerce is convenient, and it's important to remove friction from that shopping experience. Everyone is busy, and saving time plays almost as big of a role as saving money across the board. And especially, I think this applies to some of the online grocery and basket building, where when folks opt into whether they're doing pickup or paying a nominal fee for delivery for some of those retailers that charge, they're actually putting more items into the baskets, and those baskets are bigger. So again, another example where omni-channel capabilities is leading to increased loyalty and share of requirements at those retailers as that redefinition of convenience and values continues to manifest in both what is bought that's driving sales and share growth, and where and how it is purchased, as we talked about the shift towards e-commerce, as well as especially those delivery models. And finally, as we take a look at the long-term capabilities and impact across the board, those retailers who have invested in omni-channel capabilities and delivery options are really starting to pay dividends now, especially as we continue to drive into this next chapter of commerce. So we want to switch gears away from some of the share shifting and consumer drivers to talk about how we diagnose the growth drivers of our business to help make smart investment choices across the board to help drive our brand sales and share growth. And especially in this challenging growth environment, how do we leverage more precision omnichannel analytics to prioritize where and how to invest? So if we step back a minute to the overall framework that we've launched with this omnichannel growth series, one of the things that we've talked about is not just understanding the why and what our strategy is from a perspective of building baskets, attracting new buyers, or frequency, but really understanding the how levers that are leading indicators and understanding their impact on the what levers of what happened in terms of sales and share. And we started this series, quite frankly, because a lot of folks are out there thinking about and tracking, am I available online? What is my assortment? What's the price? But it's been disconnected from the sales lift overall. And now that we're able to merge that together, we've got to start using that data to help diagnose the most critical levers with all of these influences to help drive sales. So there's a lot of talk and focus when we think about all of the online causal metrics that we can track and measure in our business. And there's a ton of focus on share of page one for key search terms, and that's for really good reason. As we think about the KPIs for share of page one, it's quite similar to thinking about all the work that goes into category management and planograms and being visible at eye level on the shelf, and that eye level of the shelf will help drive increased growth across the board as more and more seen on the shelf and in the context to the category. Tracking and measuring that share of page one online for the critical category keywords becomes super important to making sure we're there on the shelf, especially for that shopper that's looking for convenience, building a basket, and trying to get a share of requirements. And so what we see here when we start tying those two things together is that there's an extremely high correlation between your change in share in page one and your overall share change at each of the given retailers across different categories. So tracking page one visibility becomes super important. The other thing that we can do with that is actually take a look at, are we getting our fair share of visibility on the digital shelf? In store, a ton of work goes into that planogramming, also thinking about displays and features across the board. And if we draw those parallels to placement on the online shelf, we can diagnose and work with our buyers as well as some of the pull levers that we have across the board for things like SEO and retail media sponsorship on the shelf to help address when we're not at our right fair share. So what we did here is to actually take a look at our share of sales. And before we dive into the correlation in online sales to share of page one, I wanted to highlight and draw your attention to the column at the right-hand side, which is the bricks and mortar dollar share. It's amazing how many brands, excuse me, are not aware that they actually have some fair share opportunities or maybe overshared compared to in-store in line, and they're not looking at that. So if you're not looking at that today, I'd encourage you to take a look and even start with what's your bricks and mortar dollar share, what's my EPOS share, and taking a look at that. And in this example, it's quite interesting in carbonated beverages, where in-store Coca-Cola actually has the highest dollar share. That's flip-flop online, where it's actually Diet Coke that has even higher share across the board, and Coke is the number 2 share. So just a reminder for folks that even the basic measurement stuff we need to be taking a look at to make sure that we're driving, especially if more of the growth is coming from online, to make sure that we're driving the overall omnichannel growth for our brands. As we dive into then the correlation between share of page one and the EPOS sales, it's interesting, as we've got highlighted here, some of the brands that actually have a much stronger visibility on page one than their sales share. Sales and sales volume is an important indicator in the each retailer's algorithm, but it's not the only thing in the algorithm that's helping to drive placement. So in this example, as we take a look at the number one shared item with Diet Coke, they actually are ranked number 7 when you take a look at share of page one. And pretty much those items in between number 7 through 11 down there are getting a greater disproportionate share of page one visibility versus their sales. And actually, the Coca-Cola mini regular soft drinks actually have the highest share online. They only have 3% of the sales in the category, but they're most dominant on the front page of the digital shelf. So likewise, we can take a look at some of the opportunities and things that we can do from a perspective as we take a look at, the top 2 items that are undershared across the board. What are some of the things that they can do from sponsorship to SEO and other tactics with their buyer to be able to manage all of the levers to be able to drive share across the board. And our sponsored percent helps us understand some of the other levers, because if you take a look in the middle, Poppi is one of those brands that's been driving huge share gains from almost nothing to now over 4% from an EPOS perspective online. And a lot of the way that they've been getting there is through promoting their way and then being able to drive the flywheel towards continued growth and visibility. So an important lever to take a look at how to drive your business and making sure that we're tracking those things like we're tracking some of the same in-store parallels. The other thing we've spent a lot of time, especially with our partners at Profitero, taking a look at is improvements in sales by moving pages to be more visible. We often joke, a lot of our OGs, that you hide dead bodies on the page 2 of search results. And here we're even taking a look at some of the lift as you move from page 4 to page 3 and move your way up across the board. And it's important to be able to tie these together because it's definitely not a one size fits all. So we take a look at the 2 sample categories here between salty snacks and coffee. The dynamics and the sales lift look very different based on the dynamics of the category. If you take a look at salty snacks, they definitely have broader kind of subcategories in between, some seasonality, and is highly promotional, maybe showing up in some of the lifts that are higher there, as well as then coffee, while lower lifts, there's a very different pattern to it. So we've got to be able to understand at the level of granularity, our category dynamics, as well as the fact that each retailer's business model is different. Some of these retailers may be basket building grocery retailers versus more gen merch across the board. As you take a look at the retailers' models, their algorithms also behave very differently. So as we take a look at some of the learnings here, I think what's interesting as we take a look at the page lifts, overall, retailer A, we're seeing less lift in both categories across the board relative to retailer B and C. And retailer C, especially as we take a look at salty snacks, it's interesting that there's a significant growth that ranges from 30 to almost 60% for each of the pages that we continue to move up. And that visibility really matters. And each incremental page gives us a big jump in terms of overall potential sales lift. The interesting dynamic with coffee across the board, especially at retailer C, then is that we see the biggest lift by getting off page 4 and into page 3, which also would indicate that folks are continuing in that category to dig a little bit deeper in terms of the search results. And so we've got to be able to tie these levers to help drive our overall sales results. And as we take a look at some of these levers in isolation, we have to remember that there's so many more levers and causals online that can be implementing this. And I think this is where sometimes teams get overwhelmed a little bit by all of the potential things that could be driving things and making assumptions. And so especially as we're working in silos to try to drive omni-channel growth, it's more important than ever that we're working across silos, because if the content team is out focusing on creating new images, SEO and optimization and certain numbers and tracking some of their conversion rates, but yet the media team is just focused on ROAS, but not so much focused on are we available or not, some of the operational levers. maybe investing in things like ratings and reviews, but not sure whether or not we're actually available, or having other issues in terms of availability, that shoppers aren't seeing our page if we've got ratings and reviews, but we're on page 3 or 4 of search results. We've got to be working across silos. Otherwise, each of the incremental investments will be optimized. And basketball is a team sport, and Omnichannel very much is a team sport, where we've got to be working to help redefine how we measure and budget within and across silos, given the multi-collinearity and dynamics of this environment, where multiple things help influence sales results. And that's why at Circana, with our digital shelf solution, we've put together some machine learning and AI model to help adjust for that multi-collinearity and stop guessing, and helping to pinpoint levers to prioritize action. So here's an example from the salty snack item at a particular retailer. By running this through some of the modeling, we're able to take a look at the sales decline, separate the signal from the noise and the complexity, and help diagnose what's really driving our overall performance, what's declining, and be able to then prioritize where our teams take action across the board to work smarter, not necessarily harder.
So we covered in our previous webinar, which, if you want to have a copy, we're happy to send you, in terms of what the holistic ecosystem looks like. Because when you're actually asking for budgeting, for new initiatives, you got to make sure is that your leadership team understands is that this is not a Chinese menu where you can just select few things and everything's going to work. Everything has to work in a tandem. And the biggest opportunity that we see, no matter what, is still with content, because as we basically were showcasing in the data, is when it comes into e-commerce growth, we are not happy, Ann and I are always not happy about the new buyer growth, because this is the metrics that we're actually looking at. It's good that we actually, based on the Profitero study, that actually talking about content is like the #1 priority for brands, on JBPs. But when we actually look at the execution of content, we often see on the PDP pages, not that many mentions or not that many content specifically designed to broaden the engagements into the category, right? Everybody's focusing on really the functional benefits of the product. Like, we are so good at it on the packaging, but when it comes into actually driving the category and attracting new buyers, there is still a lot of those conversations that we need to have with our retailers to be able to say, it's like, hey, right now we're just managing the channel shifting plus the consumption, but how do we actually drive the category penetration on e-commerce? How do we attract new people and engage them within the broader category? So when we actually looking to recap this, so there is definitely a strong correlation between both winning with search and having the content, and market share gains. But it has to be a holistic approach, because we often see clients basically focusing on improving the content, but they are actually not really paying attention to availability, or maybe towards the end of the year, the teams wants to basically invest a lot of the money in retail media, but they don't have the wrong product selection, right? So we definitely have to kind of rethink how we are thinking about ROI narrative. And I think one of the biggest examples that I always kind of talk with people is, look what Walmart did 10 years ago versus Amazon. So Amazon was trying to go towards Walmart, and Walmart was trying to go towards Amazon. But Walmart as a retailer really invested in this holistic approach and say, hey, we are not just going to put all of our money towards basically pickup. We are going to actually place the bet both for pickup, both for delivery, and hence the broader digital transformation, when it comes into that. And that has proven to be the winning strategy, because you have to have the right solution for the right time, right? And because of they were able to accomplish this. Then the other thing is really that the new buyers, and the kind of attracting new buyers is still a significant opportunity, specifically for content. So we definitely kind of recommend to rethinking and talking with your shopper teams and basically how we are actually going to be driving those categories online. And then, as I said, don't think about enhancing just a single metrics. You're not going to get a good ROI. You really got to look across all of the different metrics that you actually have, because you are trying to win basically omni loyalty, right? And you have to do that through maximizing the flywheel. And again, if you need the copy, we went in the previous webinar in very detailed how everything works together, both from consumer insights as well as flywheel and then competition. We covered this in the previous webinar, which we're happy to send copy to you.
So as we wrap up, the key highlights in helping to drive integrated change management to succeed in this next chapter of commerce. While 75% of manufacturers agree that digital commerce is both a strategic priority as well as a primary growth driver, we definitely continue to see a gap in executing and working across the board. And in our last webinar, we saw that 81% of our attendees agreed with us on that front. But the question remains, why are brands still falling short of this growth opportunities? And both Oscar and I continue to work with clients that as an organization are thinking about and kind of heading back to, well, we've been investing in e-commerce for a while. Let's just go back, let's focus on the store. We'll add some retail media. And we're doing omnichannel strategy, especially as they try to simplify in times of a focus on profitability. That is not an omnichannel strategy. And so why we continue to help build and think about, we've got to get closer to the consumer and understand fundamentally, right, how are we going to grow? There's really only 4 ways to grow: by increasing brand, category penetration, basket building, or frequency. And then how do we build out holistic activation plans, leveraging the best of in-store and the dynamics of online to pull that together and find the right investments across the board versus building a store plan and trying to amplify that. Right? Shopper marketing, as well as our whole strategy, has always been about helping influence across the path to purchase. And especially as that omni-channel journey is more complicated, we've got to make sure we're managing that journey across both things in parallel together and unlocking that potential, not just within our own walls, but also in partnership with our retailers.
Yeah, and this is something where I was especially paying attention within the Profitero survey, because what are really the brands focusing on when it comes into JBPs, and the one that I always kind of pay attention to is e-category leadership insights, and look at it, is only 26% of brands. That means only a quarter. Which of them? I'm glad to see content to be number one, but I honestly think content without really understanding how to drive that category and how to basically attract new buyers is a little bit of a lost opportunity when it comes into that. But it's interesting how this is all play out.
So I know we're at the top of the hour, but we'd love if you just take a minute as we wrap up here to give us your input, what you think is the number one headwind to getting back to omnichannel growth in 2025. Even though we're looking to get to the number one headwind, you can choose more than one on here, but go ahead and submit your results, whether that's lack of investment in e-commerce, some internal silos, over-focusing on retail media, some collaboration on change management, or the need to simplify versus embracing complexity. So we'll give you just 5 more seconds to complete your answers, and then we'll take a look at those results. All right, we've got a quorum there. Let's take a look at where we ended up. So number one is the lack of investment in e-commerce, actually coming out on top, followed by the need to simplify and embrace complexity. We'll share these back out in our next webinar across the board, but I think our audience in the same place that we are, Oscar, as we wrap up the things that we think are critical to driving growth heading into this next chapter.
So no matter what, remember, e-commerce is number one driver of the growth. And this is definitely not the time to take basically resources back to the store. So if you ever need some specific slides to help you build a story for investment in e-commerce, just feel free to reach out to me. We have plenty of them to help to build that narrative.
next thing is, amongst these growth headwinds, more important than ever that we've got to work harder to help drive and profitable growth across the board, as it's definitely a much more competitive landscape, not just with other brands, but also private label across the board, as shoppers oftentimes, right, deciding they don't care as much about our category. So we can't oversimplify our way to growth, and we've got to embrace some of the complexity and actively engage new buyers to find those incremental pockets of growth.
And number three is, of course, a lot of that new value and convenience, because we know our consumer is shifting, and we have to get better at recognizing their needs and doing right by them. And I think, having that conversation within your organization to talk about what should be our strategy, what should we prioritize within our broader product development is absolutely, paramount to do it at the moment.
Number four is having a true omnichannel approach, not just calling a store strategy with retail media. Omnichannel, we can help you partner to help build those omnichannel plans and work across silos, especially with the data and insights to help support where we should prioritize growth and help put that together to help make sure that we're connecting the dots and accelerating the flywheel effectiveness to make the most of our total investments across store, online, and even some of the other things like ratings, reviews, and content that are indirect investments.
And the last one, digital investment, it's a long-term strategy, but I think the critical is, and this is what we are recommending to a lot of the brands that we're actually working with, is to really focus on, gaining the market share and or, grow the category and really aligning everything what needs to be done for it to be true. Because then holistically, the ROI is going to be much different versus if you individually try to optimize content or optimize your availability or, optimize your retail media. So having this holistic longer term approach, almost think like Walmart a little bit in terms of that, to be able to basically put the plan together, that it's not just, a next 12-month plan, but really looking is like, hey, how can we actually get back to our fair share or even, above our fair share and being able to thrive when it comes into that category. Because I do think the next few years is going to be a little bit difficult with brick and mortar, especially with some of those changes that are coming up next year. So I think, to find that, to find those basically revenue within brick and mortar is going to be difficult. And e-commerce is a very good fail safe to basically look at winning the overall numbers.
So thank you, all of you, for hanging on for the duration across the board. Oscar and I thank you for your time and engagement. I apologize. We did our best to get to some of the Q&A during, but there was a lot of it that we weren't able to get to, and we will try to follow up across the board. Be on the lookout for the email that will be coming with your link to watch the replay, download the slides, and also from there you'll be able to access any of the other webinars. If you're new to the series and want to catch up on some of the other ones that you missed, myself or Oscar, your Circana client lead, can help guide you to the topics, especially if you want to go back to some of the prior webinars to help catch up on some of the frameworks. Always happy to help. And either myself or your client leads can help you understand some of the Circana solutions that were leveraged today to help build out our complete consumer offering, to understand where the consumer is and the sharing of incrementality and where folks are going to, and understanding the consumer dynamics to help make sure we're consumer focused and appealing to them. The digital shelf to help make sure that we're tying those online causals to overall sales, to make sure that we're optimizing the levers that we have for growth and coordinating them to help drive the most efficient plans with our retailers. And then our survey solutions for things like the subscription results and getting a pulse, leveraging the biggest panel that we've got with over 175,000 folks to be able to do some quick turn things to help test and guide your overall strategy to activation. So thank you again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar in 2025.
Thank you.